Glad y'all are watching us today. In this episode, we're going to be focused on our time in Grand Tetons National Park as well as Yellowstone National Park, and both being in Wyoming.
We mentioned in our South Dakota video that we took a few days to visit the national parks. We left Rapid City and made our way to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which is about an 8-hour drive. And along the way, we stopped at the Wyoming Welcome Center. It was just a quick pit stop, and we were surprised that the lady working was super friendly. She gave us a lot of information, offered us maps, so that was a good start to our drive.
Our plan was actually to drive straight through to Jackson Hole, not realizing that we would actually have to drive through a portion of the Grand Tetons to get to Jackson Hole. So it was a pleasant surprise that that happened, because it was so beautiful to see it a day before we thought we'd have an opportunity to see it. And as it turns out, it's really good that that did happen, because the next day when we went into Grand Tetons, again, it was there was a rainstorm. The weather wasn't as pleasant, so we couldn't even see the top of the mountains. So it worked out really well that we were able to see it on the drive going to Jackson Hole that day. It was so beautiful, it was snow covered. Over the years, we had actually heard a lot of good things about Jackson Hole, the city itself, and it didn't disappoint. Once we got into the city, we drove through and realized how quaint it was. We found a place to eat, as we mentioned in I think our last video. We talked about how much we love Food Network, and we came across this one restaurant that was on Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, and decided to check them out. Won't mention a name because we were disappointed, but in any case, after leaving there, we went and got checked in to our bed and breakfast, which was called Inn on a Creek, and it was just an incredible place. We absolutely loved it. From the time we walked in, Sarah, who checked us in, she was also handling happy hour at the time. So yeah, we did that. We talked with her. We got settled in. She recommended a place for us to be able to go and get dessert, which we actually took her up on and decided to go and do that. So we got mooshed together. We went out for a walk. It was kind of a dreary afternoon / early evening, I guess. And so we just walked around the town, a little cool, but we enjoyed the walk going from Inn on the Creek into Jackson Hole itself. We stopped at, there's a very popular thing to do there, which is to take pictures with the elk antler arches, which is in the town square. No elk were actually harmed in putting those arches together. Elk actually shed their antlers annually, so the antlers are kind of collected and put together to make it look the way that it does. And the arches are actually on all four corners of the park, so you don't have to worry about trying to stand in one location waiting to take a picture while other people take pictures as well. But in any case, after doing that, we walked over to the dessert place that Sarah recommended, called Cream and Sugar Scoop Shop. And so we did that. It was cold, it was rainy, but so we went on and headed back to the room from there. Slept very, very well that night. The bed was extremely comfortable. We had the room that was jacuzzi and fireplace, and very much enjoyed it. The next morning, Sarah was cooking breakfast while Nathan, who I believe was one of the owners, was taking orders, and so it was made to order breakfast, which was just excellent.
After breakfast, we checked out of the inn, packed up our car, got Moosh all settled in, and then we drove into Grand Tetons National Park. It was around 10:30 a.m. And as Kevin mentioned earlier, a storm was rolling in, so the tops of the mountains were covered. And then we realized how lucky we had been the day before with the gorgeous views we had. So we made our way to the visitor center, and while we were inside, the storm hit, and it was a torrential downpour. We tried to wait it out a little bit, but we wanted to get going, so we made a run for it and got soaked. It was also cold, so it was a cold soaking. Anyway, then we drove along Teton Park Road and made our way north, where we stopped by Jenny Lake, got some pictures, and then kept going. Ordered takeout at the Trapper Grill, which was inside the Signal Mountain Lodge, and the food there was really good. The lodge is located on Jackson Lake, and from there we stopped by the Jackson Lake Dam before making our way out of the park around 3 p.m. and then we headed to Yellowstone.
So the drive going from Grand Tetons National Park to Yellowstone was about an hour for us. It was on the John D. Rockefeller Jr. Memorial Parkway, which is how pretty much I think everyone has to go that way to get to Yellowstone from Grand Tetons. In any case, I've seen where the least amount of time I've read was probably 30 minutes, where someone said it took them to get from Grand Tetons to Yellowstone, and the longest was maybe 4 hours. But again, it took us about an hour. So I think you have to just keep in mind that it's going to be contingent upon the time of year that you go, right? Which is going to dictate the weather, it's going to dictate the traffic and all that. So I think that's why the range is so wide. But in any case, once we got to Yellowstone itself, we went through the south entrance. It is connected. Yellowstone is connected by driving two loops. You have the Grand Loop Road, but the upper loop and the lower loop, which are shaped like an 8. So it's like a circle sitting on top of a circle. And we went in through the south entrance and we made our way west because we were going to be staying in West Yellowstone, Montana. But we started making our way west because that's also where Old Faithful, the geyser, is. And also, I know I stated earlier that both Grand Tetons and Yellowstone are in Wyoming, and that's mostly true. But Yellowstone, 96% of Yellowstone sits in Wyoming, 3% sits in Montana, and then 1% is in Idaho. So again, the bulk of it is in Wyoming. But in any case, we started making our way toward Old Faithful. Once we got there, it took a little bit for it to erupt. They give you a time frame. There's no way to know exactly what time it's going to go off, but from what I understand, they're usually within 10 to 15 minutes or so, one way or the other, of the eruption. There are also a lot of other geysers around the area, but Old Faithful is the showstopper, I guess, because one, it shoots the highest in the air, and then two, that's the only one where they at least have a general idea of when it may or may not go off. The others are they just go off whenever, whenever the mood suits, I guess, for them to erupt. But in Yellowstone it's such a unique national park. It's actually the very first national park. It was established in 1872 as the first national park. But it's so unique, and the fact that it has so many different hydrothermal features that are just beautiful and different and colorful, and just the variety is just something to behold for sure. So after watching Old Faithful erupt, and it was a little cool that day as well, we made our way around. We stopped at a couple of other spots as we made our way toward the west exit slash entrance of the park.
As we were driving out of the park around 7 o'clock that night, we noticed a herd of buffalo off to our left, and there was a small side street that was almost like a cutaway. So as we passed it, we turned left and kind of went back the way we had came a little bit and saw all these buffalo. Two were getting into a little tussle, and then one seemingly posed for us. We got a slight side eye before it headed away, but we just sat in the car and marveled at their beauty because I love them. So yeah, that was a really monumental moment for me.
Once we got out, the hotel that we stayed in was 2 minutes essentially outside of the gate in West Yellowstone, Montana. We stayed at a place called the Kelly Inn. We were apprehensive, I will say. There weren't a lot of accommodations to choose from, and we weren't exactly sure what we were going to get from the Kelly Inn, but it was pet friendly. And the reviews were really good as well. The room was nice, although it was heavy on the woodlands decor. As you can see in the pictures, no complaints at all about the Kelly Inn. We ended up having dinner at a place called Madison Crossing Lounge that night.
The next day, we had breakfast at the hotel before heading back to Yellowstone around 10 a.m. We entered through the west entrance and headed north to drive the lower loop for the day. We stopped at various sites along the way, like Artist Paint Pots and the Norris Geyser Basin, and eventually we made our way to Yellowstone Lake, which was beautiful. Driving was a challenge there. However, the speed limit in most of the areas is 45 miles per hour. They do lower it around parking lots and different visitor centers to either 25 or 35 miles per hour, which is fine. The issue was a lot of other drivers were impatient and going well above 45. And passing, it's a 2-lane road, driving 55 or higher, which makes it challenging when you're trying to see the sights and not get into an accident. And the flip side is other drivers were stopped in the middle of the road to take pictures of the wildlife, even though there's tons of signs asking drivers not to do that and to only stop in the pull-off areas. Obviously, if there's an animal in the middle of the road, then everyone stops for safety reasons, but I'm referring to incidents where the animals are well off the street and in the grassy areas and people are hanging out their windows taking pictures, because what happened was a backup of traffic at different choke points and you'd be sitting there for a decent amount of time. We also had a little bit of an issue trying to find food. We thought we could get food inside the park at the different visitor center, but that didn't work too well for us, but luckily we brought plenty of snacks to make it work.
In my opinion, Yellowstone Lake is probably the second prettiest lake I've seen, next to Crater Lake in Klamath Falls, Oregon. It was just really beautiful with the not only the water itself, but with the mountains in the background. It's just really, really, really pretty. But from there, we made our way to Fairy Falls Trailhead, which is where the Grand Prismatic is. And the Grand Prismatic was far and away my favorite hydrothermal feature within Yellowstone itself. It was just the colors were amazing. We had seen some of it the day before. However, going up the Fairy Falls trailhead to see it from that vantage point was just, it was pretty unbelievable. The trailhead itself from the parking lot, it was about a little over half a mile, 0.6 miles, the distance in going up the trailhead to be able to view the Grand Prismatic from above. However, there was a 105 feet elevation climb, and we are in pretty decent shape, and it was a little strenuous. It wasn't the easiest climb, so keep that in mind, but it's well worth it because, again, the views from there are absolutely beautiful. And after we left the Grand Prismatic, we made our way out of the park, which was somewhere around 5 p.m. And once we were out of the park, we made our 2-minute drive from the exit back to the hotel.
So the next day, we went back into the park and we decided to drive the upper loop in the clockwise direction. We got to see an elk scratching itself very up close. The map for the park showed an area of the upper loop being closed due to weather. So our intention was to drive as far as we could until we hit that closure in the road and turn back and kind of retrace our steps back to the west entrance. However, that road closure never happened. At some point, they must have opened the road that day, and the park shack where you enter and you see where the roads are open for the day was still showing it closed. So we kept going thinking, oh, well, if it gets scary to drive, we'll just turn around. And unfortunately, when we hit that point where it did get really tight and the edges of the road looked like we were driving on cliffs, there was nowhere to turn around, so we had to just keep going. The highest point was Mount Washburn at 10,243 feet. It was beautiful and snowy, but the roads were pretty tight the further we went. So as we continued around the loop back towards the west entrance, we decided to stop at a Canyon Village general store and get something at the soda fountain before we headed out of the park.
So the next day we got up, we packed up the car, and we went and had breakfast at a place called the Running Bear Pancake House, which was close to the hotel there in West Yellowstone, Montana. It was actually really good. The food was very enjoyable. The service was really good. It took a while for everything to come out. However, it was worth it. We made our way back, driving through Montana and Wyoming, and made our way back to South Dakota later on that evening. It really was a beautiful drive. So that wraps up our time at the Grand Tetons as well as at Yellowstone. We appreciate you taking the time to watch with us today. And our next video will be coming to you from Colorado. So we look forward to seeing you next time.